Hello, students. This is Dr. Redman. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how text and melody interact in vocal music. So, when you're writing a vocal melody, there's a few general considerations you want to think about in terms of the text. So, first, you want to think about the clarity of the text. Um, in a previous lesson, we looked at how to set text to rhythm using correct prosody so that the emphasized syllables in the text would line up correctly with the meter. So you'll want to keep that in mind. And also think about the speed that you are asking the singer to enunciate the text. So tempo is also going to be important in terms of the clarity of the text. When you are uh, setting your text to a melody, typically, if there are held notes, they're usually on vowels. Um, so when a person sings, the consonant comes very quickly, but the vowel is what will be held for the duration um, of the note value. And then if there's a final consonant at the end of the syllable, um, that final consonant, or possibly multiple consonants, will come right at the end of the full note value. Occasionally, composers will ask a singer to hold out a consonant sound, typically things like M or N that lend themselves to being held a little longer. Um, but that's usually for a special effect. The other thing that you'll want to think about is the breathing. So, a singer, like wind and brass players, needs to breathe periodically in order to produce their sound. Um, and different people will need to breathe with different frequencies, and it may also depend on factors in the music, like the range or the dynamics or things like that. Um, when you are writing a piece for voice, um, I always suggest singing it yourself, even if you need to transpose it to fit your vocal range. Um, so that way you can check things like breathing and um, how comfortable it is to sing and how fast you can enunciate the text and things like that. When you are trying to indicate breathing in the score, you can do it using rests or you can do breath marks. Either one is fine, but it's usually a good idea to figure out where you want the singer to breathe. Certainly, when you have someone who's actually singing the piece, you might adjust that, um, but it's good to sort of plan it out when you're composing. Another thing to consider is whether you want to use a syllabic text setting or melismatic text setting. And often composers use a mix of the two for variety. So, syllabic means that you have one note per syllable. And this is usually good for clarity of text and for getting text across quickly. A melismatic text setting will have more than one note per syllable. And again, this is good for emotional expression, uh, creating a more interesting melodic line. So composers will often mix syllabic setting and melismatic setting within the same vocal melody or within different sections of a piece. In terms of how to notate this, when you have one note per syllable, you simply align each syllable under the note and you put hyphens between the syllables if there's multiple syllables in a word. If you are using a melismatic setting or melisma, then you're going to put a slur over all notes that go to the same syllable. And you'll use an extender line, which is that horizontal line after each syllable, to show how long the syllable lasts for. The one thing that you don't want to do in terms of notation is show one note with many syllables. Um, when you're showing the text setting, you need to have at least one note per syllable. So the bottom example where there's many syllables on one note uh, is not a correct notation. As you can see on the previous slide, you want to break up the words by syllables. And there's certain rules of thumb you can use, like if there's a double consonant, usually you break it between the consonant, and so forth. But I would always recommend using a dictionary or a website like howmanysyllables.com to ensure that you are breaking the syllables up correctly. So here's an example using the word wonder, which again, there's two consonants in a row, the N and the D. And so that's where we would correctly break our syllables. And again, there's hyphens in between the syllables. In this example, the syllables are broken in the wrong place. The N and the D both show up on the first syllable, and then we have ER on the second syllable, which is not the correct syllabification for the word. So when you are writing vocal music, you always want to check to make sure you're using the correct syllables, because that helps the singer to understand the text and what you are asking them to convey. Again, you want to use hyphens between syllables, and then those horizontal solid extender lines for single or final syllables that are held or have melismas. Again, like we saw on the previous page. If you have a single syllable or a final syllable that only goes on one note value and is not tied or doesn't have a melisma, then you don't need the extender line. In terms of the placement of the syllables, you want to put the full syllable underneath the first note, if there's more than one note, or if it's just one note, under that note. So here you can see the one is directly under the C, and then the der is under the D, and it's tied over, so we have an extender line that goes to the tied note. And the final consonant, the R, is part of the der syllable where the sound started. You wouldn't want to put the final consonant where the singer actually sings it. So in this example, you can see the R is moved under the tied note. That's incorrect. Singers know where to put the final consonants. You don't need to show them. You also want to make sure to space the rhythms proportionally, but allow room for the text to be easily read. Like with instrumental music, spacing the rhythms proportionally or close to it makes it easier to sight read the rhythms. But with vocal music, we also need to make sure that they're spaced far enough apart that the letters and syllables of the text are not colliding with each other. And you want to make sure that the text is on a single sort of horizontal plane. You want to make sure it lines up. You wouldn't want one syllable or another higher or lower than the rest. And again, that just helps to make it easier to read. When you are putting the text with the music, you want to use the capitalizations and the punctuation from your original text. And that, again, helps with clarity so that the singer can understand the text. If you happen to repeat something from the text, then usually you would put a comma in between each repetition. But otherwise, just use the same punctuation from the text. And if you are setting something that doesn't have words with meaning, you're just using vocal sounds or vocalese, you would still show that in the music. Here's a few examples of common syllables that you might use for vocalese. So ah, typically you have the AH and then the extender line. Um, and then oo would be two O's and the extender line. And then a hum or would be two M's. Um, so that would be the way that you would want to write those types of vocal sounds if you want vocalese. Um, a future video is going to talk about um, writing for specific voices and voice types and some considerations you want to think about there. Um, and so when you are creating vocal melodies, you'll want to combine the things we've talked about here and in the previous lesson with that sort of focus on how to tailor the music for whichever voice you're writing for.